Hi, my love. Welcome to the Gemma Hanley podcast. My name is Gemma. I'm your host. This is the space where I have honest conversations about overcoming anxiety and overwhelm so that you can calm your nervous system and feel really confident and happy and calm from within yourself. Along the way, I share my own stories of holistically healing 23 years of anxiety and depression myself. And so if you're a woman seeking answers to perfectionism, people-pleasing, burnout, resistance, you, my love, you're in the right place. Let's do it. Let's begin. And before we begin, I want to pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which I am recording from, which is the Gubbi Gubbi tribe. And I want to extend that acknowledgement to their elders, past, present, and emerging, as well as anybody of Indigenous or Torres Strait Islander heritage watching this replay. Okay. Welcome back to the potty, my loves. I am very, 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 very excited for today's episode. We are back with a guest, and this lady is somebody who I've been asking to be on my podcast for quite some time. She is in high demand. Her name is Dr. Olivia Lesslar, or as I know her, Liv. She is a functional medicine doctor, and she's here to chat with us about anxiety, about emotions, about alternatives to what is more commonly known as a mainstream approach or mainstream treatment model to mental health and emotional well-being. Liv and I know each other because we actually work together in a business called CFS Health. It's probably been I think this is my 4th year as part of the team there now, but I think it's at least been a few years that we've known each other.
At least 2 years for me, I think. So yeah.
Beautiful. And I just want to start, Liv, by sharing with you and my audience, because it will help them to know what to expect from you. But immediately what I noticed about you and why I just fell in love with your style, why I think you're incredible at what you do. And I'm a little bit obsessed with you. Which is your compassion and your patience just immediately shone through. As well as your generosity, and you bring so much personality and flavor and character to the insane amount of expertise that you have. You're fucking funny, which I very much like and enjoy. And probably one of the things I love most about you, which it's one of my values too, which is probably why I enjoy it so much about you, is your willingness and your ability to speak truth, but to deliver that in such a soft, loving way that can be received. And what I mean by that is, you know, if you're asked a question or if you see something that you know in your heart is actually going to really serve somebody to hear, even though it might be uncomfortable or it might not be what they want to hear or it might not be the answer you can sort of feel that they're like wanting to pull out of you, you show up and you speak that truth and you do the thing that is ultimately going to serve them and move them forwards on their health and healing journey, even though it might create maybe like some tension or might take some time for them to be accepting of that.
You know, and it's in real life, it feels like a little bit easier to do that.
Yeah.
But when we're communicating with patients online, we're in our Q&A sessions, it's harder to do that. So those are the ones where I have smiley faces at the end.
The emojis.
Lol. This is shit house. Yeah, okay.
Totally. My token is, and I was in there today and had to give some really tough love. And I wrote it. Thank you for your honesty and your question. Here's mine with love. And then I just popped it in there. So yeah, it's learning to adapt in all the different ways that we communicate and show up to support people, because technology can make it really dry. And but I see your empathy and your patience and your generosity come through in that as well. So I just wanted to start there because you just shine and you bring so much value to this space. And I'm so grateful for you. And I'm just so appreciative of you for being here and having this conversation as well. So thank you.
Oh, thanks, Gemma. Thanks for having me. Thanks for asking. I'm really looking forward to this.
Beautiful. Two women that can chat and chat and chat. So let's see where this goes. I do have a very intentional place where I want to begin. And you might not even know this about me, Liv, but it's where I would love to begin is where I started in my healing journey with anxiety and with depression as well. And what that looked like for me was, being directed by people in my life that loved me, that it might be time to like go to the GP and have a conversation, right? And not much more input than that. And I felt super overwhelmed. I felt super nervous. I can still remember like exactly where I was sitting in the waiting room, going in and having this conversation and going through the DAS, and walking out of that room with a prescription for medication, no discussion around a therapy model or conversation or support of any other kind, no information about the side effects or what was involved with taking that drug or what to expect. And really not like absolutely not feeling empowered or not feeling informed, but really also feeling, because in that state of overwhelm, really challenging to advocate for myself. So not knowing what other option that I had. And I ended up going back and asking, how can I actually have some support in addition to the medication? And so I was on medication for 3 years in the end. And I did more of the traditional model of therapy of counseling and psychologists for at least 3 years. So moved through a few different, and found an amazing psychologist in the end. But to begin with as well, like I did not find somebody who was a great match for me. And a lot of what was being offered in my direction were like really basic mindfulness techniques like breath and like noticing what was happening in my body, but like not really shown what to do with that, or meditation and yoga. And of course, those tools have their place, but they just weren't going to cut it. And when I look back on that now, I just feel for that version of myself. And so much of how my coaching business has been built and the philosophy of how I coach is reflecting on what is it that I needed that I didn't know about or I didn't have. And so, long intro into the question, but the question I have for you is, what can an alternative to that experience look like? And what's your take on, if you could change the world and click your fingers so that anybody experiencing anxiety or feeling challenged by their mental health could have a different experience to that, what would that look like?
Yeah. It's actually a really great question. It's loaded though. It's a very, very long answer, so strap in. But
got it.
I think the first thing that we have to talk about is people's perception of anxiety. It's been over medicalized. And therefore, when something is medicalized in our system, that means that you have to take a medication for it. And the very fact that you have to have an external substance to alleviate the pain of an internal problem automatically means that you're not in charge, that you're not driving, that you have no agency. So that's the first problem. We doctors aren't trained, right, to be helping a patient with anxiety apart from giving them in Australia anyway, giving them a Medicare plan, mental health plan, which then gives them a few sessions with a psychologist and or a counselor. And we're just talking about just straight anxiety, right? We're not talking about like psychiatric things that may warrant a psychiatrist. But we're not trained to sit with a patient and work through those, do psychotherapy. And therefore, the only thing at our disposal, apart from giving people information and somewhere else to go, is to give them medication. But when we do that, and we've been doing that for so many decades, people then see anxiety as this beast, this disease process that requires a medication. if I could click my fingers, I think that I would wish for everyone to stop thinking of counseling, psychology, psychotherapy, and all those things connected with that as being soft, which is why your first protocol was to see your GP, not your first protocol was to see a psychologist first, right? It was GP because it's been medicalized. And I'm not saying that anxiety is not a medical condition. It is, it's not, it is. But where we are all definitely in, being trained almost to seek a pill for every ill. And anxiety, like a lot of other complex chronic conditions, is so multi-layered, multifaceted. People get anxiety from different pathways, just like chronic fatigue syndrome, right? Some people it's post-viral, some people it's after a shocking event, some people it's after surgery or an accident. So a lot of and on top of that, with anxiety, it's about, well, how did your parents deal with stress? What was modeled to you? What did you pick up? What's your personality like? And that's why when we're not told about how many moving parts there are in the anxiety story, people give up the minute they have a shit experience with a counselor or a psychologist, because they go, oh, well, psychology didn't work for me. I tried counseling. But as you said, you eventually found someone that sang to you, that whose soul spoke to your soul, and so psychology or any of those sorts of specialties is a very subjective, very personal decision. And if the first few times it didn't work for you, that doesn't mean that there isn't something out there. Because now that I've been doing psychoneuroimmunology for a while, and I love people like Gabor Mate and Bessel van der Kolk and all that, I realize that there is so much nuance to this. And unfortunately, it isn't a case of here's a pill for this problem, or here is the one type of psychotherapy that's going to work for this issue. It's so much trial and error. And that's a real problem for the patients and for the doctors, actually.
Yeah. And as I'm listening to you speak, I'm just reflecting, I think one of the biggest pieces to that is, in order for us to end up in a place where we're having an anxious experience, we probably haven't had modeled to us, or we probably don't have a strong skill set of being able to connect inwards and identify what our needs are and service those needs and meet those needs. And so to then be trying to advocate and use those skills to find what we need to help us, when the reason we have the problem is we perhaps don't have those skills in the first place, is super challenging, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what is anxiety in the first place? I mean, that's obviously a very subjective thing, but generally speaking, it's, worry, dis-ease, frustration, unhappiness, or whatever it is about situations that, you may or may not be able to control. But you're not able to sort of put that in a little bit of a box and go, okay, I can deal with that later, or this is how I'm going to deal with it, step 1, then step 2, then step 3. It's being caught up in the worry. It's being caught up in the problem. And if you take a step back and look at it from an engineering perspective, it really is, okay, well, what are the things that you need to implement to get on top of this particular problem? It's like the Gantt chart of life. Do this, then that. Only when you do this, then you can do the next thing. But anxiety is that inability to be able to properly isolate those steps. The next thing that needs to happen, the first things first kind of approach. And that overwhelm can be debilitating. So, I think that I'd like to tell you my story of anxiety and depression.
I would love that.
Yeah, because so when I was in my late teens, early 20s, pretty much straight out of high school, really, I got a job as a waitress, and it was at a 24-hour restaurant, and I wound up doing the overnight shift. So 11 p.m. till 7:30 in the morning. And I did really well at work. I would come home, watch a bit of TV, have something to eat. So this would be about like 10 a.m. or something. And then I go to bed. And I wouldn't get out of bed until I had to go to work. That's 11 p.m. So, but when I was at work, I was fine. I'm joking and I look fine and all the rest of it. And I still remember just saying to someone once about this inability for myself to get out of bed. Like I'd be awake, but I'd be lying in there, this inertia, this something. And I remember saying, it's like I'm afraid of something, but I don't know what I'm afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only years later that I look back and now I realized that was depression. I had depression. I didn't even know I had depression. And when you find out that there are such things as smiling depressives, that was me. And the reason why that happened is because I was stuffing around with my circadian rhythm. And I wasn't eating all that well because I was only eating restaurant food because that was, cheap for us. And the stuff that was free was the bread. So, when you're a struggling student, that's what you got into. And when you went out, it was all hospos, right? So all we did was go to bars on a Monday or Tuesday night and we drank a lot. And you don't realize that depression can have so many different faces because everybody thinks of depression as someone sitting in the corner rocking themselves, crying or something.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I kind of got over that. And many years later, I was having a really tough situation at uni. And there were so many things happening that were out of my control, but which were really stressing me out. And I was losing control of not only the external, but the internal too. And I still remember something went wrong. And it was the usual thing, right? It was the printer wouldn't print and then the Wi-Fi dropped out. And it was just little things, but they just came and I had a panic attack.
Yeah.
And when I was in the middle of this panic attack, my first one, I didn't know it was a panic attack because all I knew is that I had to expend energy all of a sudden. So I started running around this room. I had 3 friends in there. I started running around and I ripped my top off because I was sweating. Then I lay under the table and I didn't know what had hit me. I was just lying under the table. I'd taken my top off. I was sweating and I had this like tingling sensation all around my lips and my fingers because of the shunting of the blood. And it was only after, obviously, that I calmed down a bit that I realized, holy shit, that was a panic attack. So
lived experience.
Yeah. And then my last story was around-ish the same time. And one day I woke up and I still remember it was like there was a cloud over me. And I just couldn't, I was like a bit numb. I just couldn't feel into anything. I went to uni, went to work. I was fine, but there was this cloud. And the days rolled into a week, and then it was 2 weeks, and then it was 3 weeks. And I remember thinking that if this was going to be me the rest of my life, I didn't want to live. Because it was just this weird, numb sensation. And anyway, when another day came along and I woke up and I was still under this cloud, I went to the doctors and by the time I got there, because I was panicking about the fact that this might be forever, by the time I got there, I had another panic attack. And I couldn't see a doctor. The doctor was full, but they put me in with a psychologist, and that's how I had my first psychology session. That's how I started the psychology. And she was good. I don't know. She was good. I did like her, but the one thing that happens when you go to doctors or psychologists or whatever is sometimes they don't explain to you why they do certain things or why they're giving you certain drugs or why these things are happening. And that's why it's very easy to be dismissive of psychological interventions. Sometimes it's very, people don't understand that what an antidepressant or what an anxiolytic and anti-anxiety medication is doing, because you don't even understand what's the changes that are happening in your body. And then just like that, one day I woke up, I had, I think, one session or maybe two, anyway, with her. And then one day I woke up and the cloud was gone. So it was very chemical. Oh, that's how I feel about it. It was a really chemical kind of a thing. And I still don't quite know why that happened then. But, you know, those are my three sort of stakes in the ground. So when I'm speaking to patients with anxiety, with depression, who have had panic attacks, you know, I've been there.
Yeah. I had very similar experiences of not understanding what was going on as well. Even when I went into the office of that GP, I didn't know that I was fitting into the category of anxiety or depression before I went in there.
Yeah.
Like part of the story or part of the perception that I had is that it was like, I was like, well, my life's not bad enough for me to almost be entitled to that category.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
100%. Yeah.
And then for me with the panic attacks, you know, I would be driving to work and all of a sudden I would completely lose my vision. And it was just, this build of panic, and my mind just going faster and faster and faster. And I had no idea what was going on or why that was happening.
Yeah. Actually, you touched upon something very true, because we don't, well, to be fair, I kind of think that the younger generation coming through, it's slightly different for them, because now anxiety and depression is so prevalent. Everybody has it basically. And, you know, I'm seeing younger and younger and younger patients. The youngest patient that I know of, not mine personally, but a youngest patient that I know of coming through with a diagnosis of anxiety and depression, 7. I mean, that's anyway, but many of us, you know, who are slightly older, we don't think that that's not us. My life isn't that bad. I'm not from a war-torn country, you know, I whatever. And maybe it's also something that women do, you know, you kind of, and I say this to patients, you know, don't invalidate yourself, because the world will do it for you. You just have to make sure that you are showing up for yourself and that you are advocating for yourself. So don't invalidate yourself. You know, one more thing I should say before I forget is that people who have got diagnoses, labels, someone who has got, especially psychiatric labels, OCD, bipolar, whatever it is, when they come in to see me as a doctor, it doesn't matter what they come in for, but they always state up front that they have this psychiatric diagnosis, because they're almost, they've almost, it's like got some sort of PTSD about it. It's almost like they've been invalidated so many times, where people don't take them seriously for their recurrent thrush or their UTI or their heart palpitations. And so she'll go, I still remember this patient, she came in and she had OCD, and she's like, oh, I have this cough and that's been going on for a really long time, but I have OCD. And I was like, you know, and I remember saying to her, you know, don't invalidate yourself. You know, you're entitled to have these other symptoms that have got nothing to do with OCD. And I really feel for patients like that, where their lens is the lens of someone who has been labeled as whatever.
Yeah. And I think part of what I see happening and what I observed, maybe I did go down this path for a while until I explored it and realized it wasn't the solution for me, is that when we're in pain, we want to make sense of that. We want to apply logic and reason to that. And a label can be really helpful for that, right? It's like, oh, okay, I fit into this box. Now I understand like what this thing is called, or how to talk about this thing, or how to make sense of this thing, right?
Yeah.
And the labels can just be so freaking helpful, right? Because you can leverage off that. Like the high quality questions we can then begin asking, like have this reference point and this anchor where we start doing our research, where we start getting curious. Sometimes what I see is that the approach that's taken, and I say by women because I work with women, but obviously it's not specific to women. But what I see in women is that they almost go down this path of, how do I now learn to swallow this and accept this as who I am and how I will be showing up in the world, and live a life filtered through that label, as opposed to what's causing this to be here in the first place. And like, so one of the things, Liv, that was huge for me was realizing that anxiety and depression and chronic fatigue, anxiety and depression were actually symptoms. Like they weren't the root cause. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you speak, and like, love to hear your reflections on that. And can you speak into that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I think that the way we've been using our language for a long time has actually shaped how people think of these things. So people will talk about being depressives, or I have depression, as if it's part of their makeup. You know, their genetics. They love to talk about that as well. And there is absolutely zero doubt that there are genetic predispositions to things like that. However, you kind of still have to provide an environment within which those genes will fire, those epigenetics will fire. So, you know, if you have an unstable childhood or adverse childhood events, as the famous study goes, if you do not have not just stability, but feelings of safety, if your primary caregiver ignores you or has got their own shit going on and can't attend to your needs at the very vulnerable years, then yeah, you're going to be more predisposed to having depression. But that wasn't written in your genes by the start, you know. Now, everything that I'm talking about, of course, is very broad strokes and very general. You know,
of course.
I'm sure there's going to be somewhere someone who it was written into their genes, but anyway, for the large part, it's not. Susceptibilities are.
I love the saying, genetics load the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And the thing about there's a second part, well, there's a third part to that. So genetics loads your gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger, but you know, lifestyle can also reholster that gun.
Yes.
Just because you can actually put the horse back into the. I'm not saying it's easy, right? And I don't have the answers for all of this, but I refuse to give up on my patients. And if my patients are willing, I also try to help them not give up on themselves. Because it's so easy to just float along the river of life, a victim to your genes. And when that happens, you need to say to the patient, hey, as a practitioner, as a coach, as a friend, I'm going to help you try to turn the tide here. But ultimately, you either choose to try and swim or not, right? There's only so much that people around you can do. But that is also partly a medical responsibility to let our patients know that they have agency. They can move that needle. They can make things better. Now, I don't mean there is a cure or that they're going to be 100% better or anything like that. But that's why we, you know, softly catchy monkey. We move that needle slowly. So you give someone back 1%, 1%, 1%, 1%, because that adds up. And if at some point you're stuck at 15%, that's still 15% more than you had 2 years ago, 6 years ago, whatever it is. And we have to sort of at least lean into the fact that this is a journey. It's not on and off. The number of patients I've seen, number of patients that we share together at CFS, where it's like, oh, I've been doing this, but it's not working, or I've tried everything. It's like no, it's not how it works.
Yeah,
This
it's the
is not.
subtleties, isn't it? And the tweaks. And I hear you, and I've lived it. It is not a fucking easy, short journey. Yeah.
No, yeah, absolutely not.
By no means.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite quotes is a Tanzanian proverb. You would have probably heard me bang on about this over and over again. But little by little, a little
Yeah.
becomes a lot. And if we don't
Yeah.
let ourselves experience the little or celebrate the little, welcome in the little, if we're always looking for like, where's the immediate gratification? Where's the lot?
Yeah.
We never get to have it. We never
Yeah.
get the lot.
When I think it's looking at sort of more ancient practices to understand that even medicine, people practice medicine. People don't do medicine, right?
Yes.
And that's because you're never done. You're always learning. You're going to be wrong a lot of the time, and you're going to learn from that, or hopefully. And it's like meditation. It's a meditation practice. It's a yoga practice because you're never done. And I think we need to take that sort of philosophy and idea into everything that we do. Dealing with stress, anxiety, depression, whatever it is, it's not that I'm going to find the silver bullet, my anxiety will end, and then that's the story. No, because life is going to throw more shit at you at some point down the road, and you need to be able to, you know, nuanced sort of approaches to this new problem, and you're going to have to, learn from it, and you may not surmount it as best you thought you could because you surmounted the last problem, but it's slightly different, and it's a different day, it's a different person, and that's life, right? It's a lot of these things just basically honing, you're practicing life
Yeah.
until it's, oh God.
Yes. Yes. It's a do with process
Yeah.
rather than a do to ourselves.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's not this list of tick boxes that like you tick it and then it's done. It's a health and happiness, holistic, thriving health and happiness. It's a lifestyle. It's a way of
Yeah.
being,
Yeah.
which is what I had to discover. And, do I never experience anxiety? Fuck no. Right. But like, because I'm always showing up to that practice of life, and because I am always building those skills, when anxiety surfaces for me, and now it's extremely rare, it's extremely low intensity, but I see it and I feel it and I know how to respond to it really quickly. And I'm so grateful for it because it's taught me so much. And this is,
Life would be boring, wouldn't it, if you
yes.
didn't have these challenges? I'm not saying that I welcome and love anxiety, but also know what the other side of the coin is. And that is if nothing happens. There is this. I was actually just having a chat to someone today about wealth. And he was talking about his good friend who's a multi-gazillionaire. And I couldn't think of anything more boring.
Yeah.
Imagine not having to, not having to. Look, you didn't. If you don't get out of bed and not show up to work or do something like that, like whatever. And I'm sure there are plenty of gazillionaires who find meaning in other things. But I just. And also, my friend made a good observation. He notices that people who got a lot of money wound up having less resilience about smaller things because they're not continuously being challenged anymore. And what did he call it? I called it a resilience quotient. He called it a adversity quotient. Right? The adversity quotient gets really low because you're not continuously being challenged. Everything is too easy and he also said that essentially anything that crops up, you just throw money at the situation and it goes away.
Yeah.
Right. So you're not honing those skills, those life skills.
And I think, what we're talking about beneath the surface here is our exposure to growth. Yeah. And a lot of the women who I speak to and who listen to this podcast, they like to think that they value growth, and a lot of them do. And some of them are, what is the word I'm looking for? They're aspiring to be someone who values growth. And it's confusing, right? Because inherent within the nature of growth is challenge, is feeling tested, is being called into and asked to do things that our neurology and our nervous system have not experienced before, so they don't have the template yet. Now, of course, if there's like an overwhelming amount of that growth and uncertainty on our plate at one time, that's maybe going to be something like we want to tap out of. But when we talk about, you know, that example of, I don't know what you said, like a billionaire or zillionaire or whatnot, like, you know, if we're craving that and it's like, it feels like it's something that's so far away, part of that craving or that desire is actually like to press the skip button and to avoid like the journey that life, source, universe, God, whatever it might be, and the rich learnings and the connections that we get to make because of those rich learnings. You and I are sitting here having this conversation and share a friendship because my life fucking sucked like 10 years ago. Like I was like, I don't know if it could get worse than this, like rock bottom, panic attacks, suicidal thoughts, like can't even get out of bed. A good day is sitting in a wheelchair for half an hour. Like, you know, there's so much richness in that. And I'm not talking about this toxic positivity or like always having to see the silver lining. It's more this whole rounded definition or understanding of what growth actually is.
Yeah. And you know, I don't want to sit here and sound like an expert because I still struggle with those sorts of things on a regular basis. You know, I fly a lot, and jet lag does play havoc with my circadian rhythm, obviously, and does play havoc with my moods. And then you throw into the mixed periods. Oh my God, you know, it's just like, but it is what it is. So, and understanding that some days, some months, you are firing on all cylinders and you are boss lady, and then some months it's just not so great. But that's part of the ride, right? So I used to beat myself up a lot. Now not so much. I still do, but not as much. You know, I give myself a little bit more permission when things aren't great. And I think that most of us will struggle from time to time, and that's life.
Yes. Life is definitely hard, and it's hard for all of us in different ways. One of the things that I get asked a lot, or I see women confused about or experiencing and sitting in the pain of, that fits in nicely, I think, with this conversation we're having, is like, how long do I have to be consistent before I'll see results? And like this feeling of burden of the healing journey. And when I talk about consistency, I'm asking you that from the perspective of something you mentioned towards the start of our conversation of how multifaceted it is, and it's not one thing. So like, you know, movement, diet and nutrition, sleep, exposure to different environmental elements, and yes, the love of and what I speak into all the time, our emotions and the nervous system. Yeah. What's your answer when someone, you know, feels like they're showing up, they're pouring their heart and soul into it, and they're like, fuck, like how long before this starts to shift? And like,
that's the uncertainty principle. And the uncertainty principle is actually the hardest part, because if you were to say to someone, I'm going to torture you, but it will absolutely end at such and such time, or it's not torture, but it's like a low level something, but you don't know when it's going to end. I know that I probably choose the torture, because when you know when something is going to end, that just you can relax into it. Well, not relax into torture. This is a very weird analogy. You know, as in like you can just when you know when the end date is, you can sort of relax into it because okay. But the biggest problem I know for all our CFS patients, my anxiety, depression, psychiatry patients at work, is that they don't know if this is going to be forever or if they will get better. And that is so scary. And I don't have an answer. you know? I mean, I think that I know that one thing I do say to all patients is to never give up hope. And I have to define hope first. And that is for me, when I'm talking to my patients, hope is the absence of despair. So even when I'm faced with a terminally ill patient, when I say hope, the one thing that conventional doctors like to jump up and down about is, oh, false hope, false hope, false hope. Yeah. But it's like, what exactly do you think that means? Like, what is the definition here? And that's why I was trying to find first. Right, okay. So it's the absence of despair, because let's talk about the most extreme, and that is a terminal patient. You can go down this path where you're going to be looking for options, right? And trying to help, heal, go into remission, something, right? Something, anything. But there are two ways to die. There's dying without despair, sadness, yes, frustration, of course, but there's dying without despair, because you've put to bed a few things and you've lined up your ducks and stuff. And there's dying with complete despair. And I've seen both, and I know which way I'm going to choose. So then you pull back from such an extreme story and you look at everything else that we have to deal with. There are two ways that you can deal with uncertainty and chronic fatigue syndrome or anxiety. One is if it's just full of despair. And I'm not saying that we can't duck in and out of despair. I mean, I certainly do, right? Because it's part of the experience. But when you live in the trenches of despair, it is dark. It's a really, really dark place. And so to have anxiety but not succumb to despair too often, that's a very different lived experience from having anxiety and also wallowing in despair. So I don't really have an answer for patients who are coming through saying, when will this end, when will this end? All I know is that we can experience the journey two different ways.
I love that.
So.
And I guess on that, and I imagine what would contribute to someone's ability to experience it, moving in and out of despair at times, or being locked into the depths of that darkness and complete despair, is, and if I'm not incorrect, if this is something that you're passionate about, is looking at lifestyle factors as well. And so, one of the things I did this week was speak to a couple of my girlfriends who I know have experienced anxiety in the past, or are in the process of understanding it and healing it and moving through it. And I asked them, what questions would you have, or what would you have liked to have known or to hear? Yeah. And so one of the questions that came up, which I just think I love it, it's gold, is like, how much of the response is about what needs to be added in versus how much of the response is what needs to be removed based on the common typical lifestyle of a modern day woman and how she's living life and doing life right now.
Wow, that's a great question. Okay. So it's going back to, we're talking about fundamentals anyway, right?
Yeah,
lifestyle
for
fundamentals. Sure. Okay. There is definitely, because it's actually two sides of the same coin, you can actually answer it both ways. So in other words, what do you need to remove? You need to remove light after dark. You need to remove blue light, definitely, after dark. Or you can say you need to add in warmer, softer, right? light after dark. So there's always going to sort of be two sides of the coin. You can say, right, we absolutely need to be removing seed oils. That's non-negotiable. A lot of diet stuff is negotiable with me, but seed oils is non-negotiable.
Mm-hmm.
Canola oils, anything that comes in a clear bottle is an out. Anything that comes in a clear bottle that's plastic is definitely out. The other side to that coin is you need to add in more omega-3 fatty acids that aren't oxidized, whether it's good quality olive oil or it's butter from, well-treated cows that's organically churned, whatever. So what should you take out and what should you add in question is interesting because you can actually look at a lot of things from both perspectives. So the basics of food is that you have to remove the seed oils. You have to take out as much ultra-processed foods as possible. And you absolutely need to take out processed sugars, added sugars. When we then talk about sugar, people will always ask about natural sugars, right? In honey and that kind of stuff. And because I'm slowly catchy monkey here, let's just start with that 1 teaspoon of sugar that you put in your coffee, or the excess sugars that are in some of your nut milks or whatever. And that is where I would start first. Then we can start targeting things which may be a little bit dubious, like certain types of honeys, the more processed stuff, So get the easy things out of the way first. If you get rid of the processed foods, what does that mean? It means that what's going in instead is the whole foods, right? It's like, oh yeah, but should it be more vegetables? Or, you talk a lot about organ meat stuff to Leslie, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, actually, let's just get rid of the ultra processed food first. See what your body is craving, what works for you, because I know how much some of my patients have thrived when they're in the depths of their autoimmunity on carnivore diet. But I also know that, myself included, I have done really, really well on plant-rich diets. So I'm very agnostic. It's like, where are you in your life? What are you trying to achieve? What are the issues that you're experiencing? 1 minute you're carnivore, 9 months down the road, you're much better. Let's get some vegetables in. Or let's give, vegetarianism a go for a little bit. Like, it's what sings to you. You'll know if your body's responding to something well, right? So one of the reasons why I encourage organ meats is because they're incredibly nutrient dense, and they are able to offer certain vitamins to the body that the body doesn't have to convert first. The famous one is vitamin A. So the number of patients who are probably, from some nutritionist standpoint, it's like, oh, well, they're definitely getting enough vitamin A from, whatever, carrots or whatever. That's beta carotene. That is a pre-vitamin A. Your body has to convert that. And conversion is already a bit of a problem for most of us because we haven't had that evolutionary sort of pressures to be able to convert. Most of us have had access to animals, so we just don't quite have that capability. And I know my DNA, and I know that I have a even less ability to convert beta carotene into vitamin A than the average person, so that's why I like organ meats a lot. And so anyway, that's diet. But yeah, so to your friend's question about what goes in first and what goes out, it's an interesting one.
Yeah. And I love that it's individually based, and even for the individual, it's going to be flexible, right? And it's going to look different. Like, I did keto for at least 6 months. Yeah. And it was really helpful for those 6 months. And
wow, okay.
I ate 2 tablespoons of organ meat every single day for 6 months. And like,
Fantastic.
Not something I want to necessarily like continue or have, but like the time and the place, right? That's what my body needed. And that's what it was calling for at that point in time. I'd love to go like a bit of a tangent on this question next, right? Because a lot of what I see is women might open to this and then they really get on board with it and they're feeling the benefits of it. And then comes like this attachment and like this tight gripping to like, if I am not doing all of these things this way, if I am not eating things this way, and it's almost like this like rigid to-do list that must happen every day at a certain time of day in a certain way, in order for them to know that they can feel happy, they can feel healthy. That sings to me total mistrust of the body and self, right? And again, we're talking about different stages of healing. So it's not that that's wrong to get to that point or that it's bad. It's just, is that allowing you to now thrive for the stage that you're at? And that some of these things can have become like quite trendy as well. And so what about from that perspective of, you know, when we've got a woman and she's so on board for doing all the lifestyle, and I don't like this word, I'll use it in inverted commas because a lot of people will know what I'm saying, hacks. And, you know, she's got that checklist and she's an expert at all of these like functional lifestyle techniques that support her body. But in turn, that is feeling like overwhelm. That is now feeling like stress. Like, what's the balance there of like what maybe needs to come out that has actually served us in the past in order for us to now thrive, that might not make like logical sense. It might feel a bit ironic. Like,
So, you
what
know,
do you say around that?
There's actually this new term called, well, new term, it's been around for a while now, but orthorexia. Have you heard of that?
No. Oh, I've maybe heard of it, but I don't know what it means.
So orthorexia is this pathological anxiety around eating perfectly. And I don't know, I have actually asked this question, but I don't know if orthorexia extends to other lifestyle things as well. But wow, in my practice, you know, people get an Aura ring or a Garmin watch or whatever it is, and they're obsessively checking their data. And the problem when you do that is that you're outsourcing how you feel. I had a patient once who called me in a panic because he had something very important on that day, but his Aura ring told him that he had shit sleep and that his readiness score was really rubbish and all this, right? And he's like, I did it. And he's like obsessing about why his score wasn't good. So this is what I did yesterday. This is how but I thought that I've done this before. And he's just going on and on. And I was like, whoa, stop. Like, how do you feel? And he goes, I feel fine. I said, chuck the fucking thing out. Like, it's
yes.
And this is, we've bred this. Our society has bred this where we don't trust ourselves. And that's why there's this dogmatic adherence to certain lifestyle gurus or Instagram celebrities or influencers. And and I say to my patients, even me, I'm here to try and guide a little bit to the best of my current ability, my current knowledge. Holy shit, come back in 2 weeks and that might be completely different. My practice in the last 2 years, since I really started being open to the idea that, oh my God, when I graduated medical school and then finished my internship and residency and I was on track to be whatever, I was at the top of the Dunning-Kruger curve. Do you know the Dunning-Kruger curve?
I do not.
I'm at the Dunning-Kruger curve is a psychological thing where basically it's on the x-axis is how much knowledge you have in the field, right? And the y-axis, I believe, is like confidence.
Okay.
So the people with like us doctors, honestly, at the beginning, we are just so confident because we passed those exams and those medical textbooks were gospel, I tell you, the Bible of rheumatology and cardiology and rah, rah, rah. And so we're at the top of the Dunning-Kruger curve. And as you actually start to work, you can go down two pathways. One, you stay on Mount Stupid. Or two, you start to descend into the valley of despair where you're like, I fucking know shit. Oh my God. Then you kind of come out of it when you have a little bit more knowledge and you basically start to, you're here and it's more complicated. I don't know everything, but I'm trying. I'm practicing, and I'm going to keep challenging myself. Yeah, so, you know, I found myself that when I finished medical school, that I was definitely at the top of Mount Stupid. And when I finally, in the last 2 years, started opening my eyes and speaking to more people and going to all these different conferences, and just, if you walk in with beginner's mindset, you know, that Japanese concept, you know, you walk into everything with beginner's mindset, you actually realize that you know nothing, right? But we try. And that's it. We try our best. Hence why right now what I say to patients is, this is the best of what I think I know. Right? I don't know what I don't know as well. But, you know, patients need to understand, if a doctor doesn't know, you know, you cannot outsource everything to an external person. You have to start being able to, oh, and when I say external person, I don't mean just external person, external anything, your bloody aura ring, your whatever. You have to be able to know what your body is saying. You have to be able to check in with yourself. That's why actually those food diaries are very important. So any diary is very important, because you start to see patterns and you're starting to learn what's what. Anyway, that's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah, I love that. And I have women do that often, if, you know, they're at the earlier stages of anxiety, is like, let's just get curious about, like, what time of day is that happening, and what's happening around you when that's happening, and what's the self-talk when that's happening. Because then it's not about any individual moment as such. It's like, let's just look for a pattern here, and then we've got some data that's been collected to work with. But and this is just where this conversation's gone. And then there will come a point in time that if we stay there and fixate on it, it will become unhelpful. I shared with.
Yeah, that's why I try now. And you know, someone who's so rigid about making sure they eat at a certain time and that they you know, that's also anxiety, right? And it's like, why are you trying so hard to control things? Because the answer may just be, I'm very organized, or the answer may actually be, I had a loss of control when I was a kid, or I have a loss of control in my marriage, or whatever it may be, and you're trying to find control in some of these other parts of your life. And so there you go. It's like, okay, well, maybe we need to address that too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm.
One of probably the last question that I have for you, and then I'm going to check in and see if there's anything that you wanted to add or bring to this conversation too, Liv. But again, this one came up when I did a little survey of some women in my life, is this question of, and I wonder, I'd love to know if you get your patients ask you this, is, how do I explain to my loved ones that more like modern conventional medicine model isn't my truth? It's not what's working for me.
So that's really interesting, because there is actually so much evidence for everything else that we're talking about. In other words, there is evidence about the adverse childhood events. There is evidence about biopsychosocial components, lifestyle factors with regards to prevalence of anxiety and depression. There is absolutely evidence with regards to the fact that increased inflammation can be driving anxiety and depressive symptoms, because that model of a lack of serotonin in the brain is the reason why you have these issues. Therefore, let's just put more serotonin back within SSRI. Like, those models are slowly being eroded. And all you have to do is just plug into Google anxiety and inflammation. Boom, it all comes up. And they're all papers, they're all peer reviewed, it's all there. It's actually more that the guidelines are slower to move. Medical education is slower to move. So even though the conventional way of dealing with anxiety and depression is not your truth, there is absolutely science and evidence for everything else. So sometimes when I'm trying to talk to my patients, because as you can imagine, right, a lot of the things I'm talking to patients about, they'll go, well, yeah, but if this is the case, then why hasn't my specialist told me this? Why hasn't my doctor told me this? And the answer is because nobody can know everything about everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's there. It's just not the accepted norm. But is there evidence? 100%. And then I have to go through the evidence with them. See this paper, notice that all these papers, 2019, 2021, 2023, like it is all there. You know, so if there is a woman person out there struggling by saying, look, I don't want to go on medication. Right? And that is a very personal choice as well. Like, I'm not anti-medication. I'm just saying, okay. And that's why I say in LCFS, some of the questions that I'm trying to answer,
Yeah.
right?
And I actually
Medications
saw
are helpful.
a response that I loved today, and I'm sorry to jump in, but I'd love you to share this too. You gave an analogy about a Band-Aid, and
Yeah,
I'm trying to remember, and a cut. Yeah, can you share that?
So I was saying, because the question was something along the lines of taking an antidepressant, which is going to fix the anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And I said that the analogy to that is a little bit like if you have a wound that's bleeding, you can put a Band-Aid on the wound to stem the bleeding. But I would have missed that patient had a clotting issue with their blood, because I haven't investigated the why yet. You got to be looking at the why. So, you know, the model that we have now is that if you have anxiety, I need to be fair to doctors here, including to myself, because I've done this too, right? We do the best that we can with the knowledge that we have. And right now is that if you have anxiety, you get given a medication, a benzo, let's just say. If you have depression, you get given an SSRI. Sometimes that can be helpful. Absolutely. The Band-Aid on the wound is going to help you stop losing blood. But you also need to be asking deeper questions, right? And if you rely on that SSRI, that Band-Aid, to fix your problems magically, then you never answered the why you got those problems in the first place. Medications can help you open up that healing space. It can decrease that blood pressure and that heart rate. It can make you feel a little bit less overwhelmed, allowing you space to breathe. And then ask the why questions, and then figure out the next steps that will get you to a point where if something else like this happens in your life, you can deal with it without needing to resort to medications or supplements or whatever it is. So medications can be helpful, absolutely, 100%. And in some cases, you know, medications are the only route for some people. But you know, when you and I, we both are all about the compassion stuff, the self-compassion. Don't beat yourself up if that, you know, you want, you know, I want to do the medications. Okay, great, do it. Let's commit to that. Let's get you to a place where you can then start tackling with the whys. Anyway, I think everyone thinks that I'm an anti-medication, and I'm not. I'm just I'm anti-using medications as a Band-Aid.
Yeah. And my experience was really similar. I was on medication for 3 years, and you know, I got to the point where I was like, cool, I have talked about my problems inside out, and I understand what has caused these problems to be here to an extent, or you know, the environments and the mechanics to an extent of these problems. I feel numb. I can't feel anything. I feel like I'm ready to go a level deeper and look at like, well, what now needs to happen with this knowledge for me to respond to this and create a different reality? And that's what it looked like for me.
Yeah. And that's exactly the path that most patients need to take, you know, except that most patients are, and including myself, I was put on an antidepressant. This is years and years ago now. And as the thing about it that I just couldn't handle was that, I didn't feel the lows, but I didn't feel the highs either.
That's right. That was, I became very, and you might have the language for me, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but indifferent.
Yeah.
That started feeling more problematic and dangerous to me than feeling everything.
Yeah. And I had anorgasmia as well. I couldn't reach orgasm with it. Like
Right.
it just affected so many things,
Yeah.
And eventually I sort of woke up to myself and I was like, okay, well, because I was taking this antidepressant. I was on it for 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
I was taking this antidepressant, but I realized I wasn't doing anything differently.
Mm-hmm.
Still living the same life. I was still in the same fish tank in which I got sick.
Yeah.
And instead of giving the sick fish medication, you got to change the water. You got to clean the water, right?
Absolutely.
And
And
so,
is that the right fish tank for the fish to be in the first place?
yeah, exactly, right. With this fake plants and pirate's castle. So anyway, but yeah, so that's we need to give the fish the medication, sure, but actively work to changing the water, cleaning the water too.
Mm-hmm. And I think part of the compassion piece around medication too, which, I journeyed through, was like, I didn't know any better. Yeah. And
Yeah.
this is where we started this conversation. Like I wasn't aware of any alternatives. Okay, sure. I could have researched more and I could have asked bigger
Yeah, but you
questions
didn't
and
know
I could
what
have
you didn't
looked.
know.
That's right. Yeah. And so we've got to have compassion for where we were and look at the purity of our decisions based on what we did know and what we didn't know at that point in time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the same with lots of doctors, right? I mean, I don't know what I don't know, and the more I seek, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know, which I'm now really enjoying. To be honest with you,
Yes.
I really enjoy going to a conference that I don't know anything about. So I'll go to random conferences. So I'll go to a renal conference, a cancer conference. I'll go to a brain mapping conference, and then I'll end it off with a neurotrauma conference just
You're
to round out the
such a
month.
nerd.
I'm a geek. That's different. Have you not seen the difference between geeks and nerds? And
I'm
so,
ready to be educated.
so I think it's this really cute little Venn diagram that you can find online. But basically, it's intelligence, obsession, and social aptitude or ineptitude, and like geeks geeks have got the intelligence and the obsession, but the nerds are the ones with the social ineptitude and the intelligence or something. And a dork is, I don't know, anyway, that's cute. So yeah, and I don't know what I don't know, but
Mm-hmm.
because I'm at this point now in my career where I know there are things that I don't know, so I'm super open-minded now.
Yes. And life becomes easier. Like with the acceptance of that, instead of the pressure, it's just ease. And like it
Yeah.
just is.
And it frustrates me a little bit when I hear patients get gaslit by doctors. It's, I've heard about this. What do you think? And they go, where's the evidence for that? Like
Mm-hmm.
that, it's almost like that tells me that that tells me, first of all, that you're not open-minded, but also a lot of these therapies have got evidence for it. So actually, you need to tell me why you don't, why you don't know about it more than putting it on the patient or putting it on another doctor. Where's the evidence for that? Like that's the standard throwaway phrase that they think wins them the argument.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, it'd be really much better for everybody involved if doctors more often said, "I don't know, but let me figure that out. I don't
Yeah.
know, but let me ask."
Yeah.
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 Patients deserve more. Patients deserve better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anything else that you want to add to this
Oh,
incredible conversation that we
we
could
could
keep
probably
rolling on
speak.
for hours?
I was gonna say, yeah, like it'd be nice if maybe came back in a little bit another time and talk about, there's so much to talk about, right? Because I'm very much about trying to help patients understand why these symptoms are occurring.
Mm-hmm.
Not just from an immune standpoint, nervous system standpoint, but also from an evolutionary perspective,
Yeah.
or from a psychoneuroimmunology perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some patients, I know for me, it does make a difference. It really helps with the agency that, okay, if I know that this feeling of anxiety or these anxious feelings are arising because okay, so I've had bad sleep. And I know with bad sleep that you're going to wind up having a less robust immune system the next day. Like one night of poor sleep defined as 5 hours means that your NK cells, your natural killer cells, the next day work up to 70% less effectively. Now, if your NK cells are not firing on all cylinders, the rest of your immune system is going to go shit, 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 shit. So it's going to become hypervigilant. When it's hypervigilant, it's going to have an effect on your cortisol. It's going to have an effect on how you perceive threats coming through. So, there's all these, that's just one facet to this amazing psychoneuroimmunology gambit. And so helping patients understand what's happening, why it's happening, and therefore, okay, so if you understand that poor sleep can do that, plus all these other things that poor sleep can do, then you are definitely going to prioritize sleep. You're going to be protective of sleep, and you're going to do it with your eyes wide open. Not when you're sleeping, of course.
Which would have been a game changer for me, right? Like I was just so dismissive of the basic lifestyle things. I just didn't know.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you don't understand the whys, and once you dig into the whys, you're like, oh, boom, you teach people to fish. Don't just give them fish.
Yes. Yes.
And that's me done.
One last question I have for you, because I love this and I believe that connection and vulnerability is an antidote to feeling disconnected from ourselves or anxious or stressed. What's something that you are like, either what's a growth project for you at the moment or something that's lighting you up inside in your life personally?
So I've told you about the fact that I've got tinnitus, right? And that's come on only in the last few days. And I know that it's a weird thing to say. It's not lighting me up inside necessarily, but it's a really great, humbling event. Understanding what patients are going through.
Yes.
Going through the confusion and then the dismay, some despair, trying to find hope, trying to take all the advice that you give patients, right? Trying to be vulnerable by asking other doctors for advice or help, even though you're considered a bit of an expert or whatever. Putting together a protocol, finding the time for the protocol, trying to prioritize your money for the protocols, trying to ascertain how you're going to monitor yourself. All these things which sometimes we can burden our patients a little bit too much with, right?
Yeah.
And then when you go through it yourself, you're like, okay. But the good, and this is where I found the lighting me up inside part. That was when I started to beat myself up about how shit all this can be and how I could have supported patients better by holding their hand more or not overwhelming them with so much information or whatever. I was able to just go, that was what I knew at the time.
Yeah.
And I had this self-compassion moment. And that really sort of made me went, oh, wow, look at me, I'm growing. So to be fair, to be very, to be honest, the tinnitus is not a amazing thing right now, but finding the positives right then, when I went, oh, okay, I'm all right. I understand why I did all the things that I did do. That was nice for me. So as far as projects go, my project is going to be myself for the next couple of months, trying to get over this
I love
tinnitus.
that. I love that. And I couldn't agree with you more. Like that gift of, oh my gosh, yes, okay, this is how my clients are feeling, or this is how my patients are feeling. Revisiting that for me, whilst it can be uncomfortable and frustrating and not where we want to be, so helpful.
And it's also when you start to do well in your career, or people are saying, oh, this is really great stuff, or you've got another company. So I'm a medical clinical advisor to several companies now, or another company has asked me to do that. It's easy to climb back up Mount Stupid, right? To go, oh, I clearly know a lot about whatever. And then to have these humbling moments, you're like, okay, thank you. I needed that.
Yeah.
Dear. Anyway, so I'm slowly sliding back down Mount Stupid into the Valley of Despair. And to be fair, I actually really like being in the Valley of Despair as far as knowledge goes. So
Yeah,
yeah. Well, I'll check in with you often though to let you know how this journey is going.
for sure. For sure. I would love that. I would also love you to share, for anybody who's listening to this podcast and they would love to get in touch with you, they would love to learn more about you, how can they find you?
So the easiest would be either Instagram or my website, and that is Dr. Olivia Lesslar. Website is .com. That's my handle for most of my social media, actually. So that would
Beautiful.
include Twitter. So that's at Dr. Olivia, Lesslar. I do most of my consultations through Singular Health, which is my amazing brain center here in Sydney. But otherwise, if you're a CFS, if you're a chronic fatigue syndrome patient, I actually do encourage you instead to go to cfshealth.com because then you have access to me a little bit more.
I'm exactly the same. It's phenomenal, the work that is going on in there. I did the program over 7 years ago now, and it's insane.
Yeah. But the one thing I do want to say to patients about, getting a consult or whatever, I don't practice as a general practitioner. I'm not a GP. I don't follow patients through. So essentially I do a higher order, higher level consultation where patients are stuck or doctors are stuck. They've hit a wall or a fork in the road and or they have a mystery illness or they don't know why they're sick and they've seen several people. Usually they see me 1, 2, maybe 3 consultations. That's it. And then I will say to patients, look, I do try to keep up to date with everything, which means that my knowledge base does change and hopefully improves. So you can check in every 6 to 12 months, but otherwise, if I can't figure out something within 3 consults, then I'm not the doctor for you right now.
Love that. There's that honesty and that truth again. Thank you so much. I love you so much. And I love having these conversations. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much for being you.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you for being here for this conversation, my love. If you would like more free resources, if you'd like to learn about my programs or coaching opportunities, you can find all of that information at my website, gemmahanley.com. I'll link it below in the show notes. And if you would like to connect daily, head over and find me on Instagram. My handle there is Gemma E. Hanley, and I reply to all of my DMs there personally. If you enjoyed this episode and found it valuable, please share it with someone. You never know who needs to hear one little thing to take their day from feeling stuck and heavy to light and free. See you on the next one.